The moment Marcus saw her across the crowded subway platform, kneeling beside a homeless man and offering him her lunch, he forgot about the designer-clad date waiting for him at the restaurant uptown. She wore faded jeans with a small tear at the knee, a simple gray sweater that had seen too many wash cycles, and sneakers that had logged countless miles. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, strands escaping around her face as she laughed at something the old man said. There wasn't a trace of makeup on her skin, just the natural flush of her cheeks in the cold November air. She was radiant in a way that made his chest ache, not because of how she looked, but because of what he witnessed in that unguarded moment. Pure, uncommon kindness in a city that had forgotten how to slow down. Marcus had spent the last 3 years dating women who seemed perfect on paper. Women with impressive careers, flawless appearance, and the kind of sophisticated charm that turned heads at every gallery opening and charity gala. They knew the right restaurants, wore the right brands, and said the right things at the right times. Yet every relationship had left him feeling emptier than the last, like he was collecting beautiful shells on a beach, only to discover they were all hollow inside. He stood frozen on the platform, watching this stranger unwrap a sandwich and split it in half without hesitation. The homeless man's weathered hands trembled as he accepted the food, and she steadied them with her own, her touch gentle and unhurried. Marcus saw her mouth form words he couldn't hear over the rumble of an approaching train, but whatever she said made the old man's eyes crinkle with the first smile Marcus had probably seen on his face in months. The train doors opened, and she stepped inside. Marcus made a split-second decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone, sent a quick apology text to his date, and followed the woman in the gray sweater onto the train. He didn't approach her immediately. Instead, he watched from a few seats, away as she pulled out a worn paperback, a dog-eared copy of East of Eden, and became absorbed in its pages. Her fingers traced the lines as she read, and he noticed her lips moving slightly as if savoring the words. When an elderly woman struggled with a heavy shopping bag, this stranger didn't hesitate. She stood, offered her seat, and helped hoist the bag onto the overhead rack, all while insisting it was no trouble at all. 3 stops later, she got off at a neighborhood Marcus rarely visited, at the working-class area where rent was affordable and dreams were often deferred. He followed at a distance, feeling equal parts foolish and compelled by something he couldn't name. She walked into a community center with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read, Hope Harbor Food Bank. Marcus waited outside for 20 minutes before his curiosity won. He pushed through the door and found himself in a bustling space filled with volunteers sorting donations and families waiting in quiet dignity for assistance. And there she was behind a table, her sweater sleeves rolled up, laughing with a young mother while packing boxes with canned goods and fresh produce. Can I help you? A woman with kind eyes and a volunteer badge approached him. I'd like to volunteer, Marcus heard himself say. That's how Marcus found himself. A corporate attorney in a $1,500 suit, standing beside Emma Rodriguez, the woman with no makeup and no fancy dress, learning how to properly pack food boxes so that families would have balanced meals for the week. First time? Emma asked, glancing at him with eyes the color of warm honey. Up close, he could see the tiny freckles across her nose, the laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life filled with joy despite hardship. That obvious? Well, most people don't volunteer in Armani, she said with a grin that held no judgment, only gentle amusement. Marcus looked down at his suit and laughed, really. Laughed for the first time in months. I was supposed to be at dinner uptown. What happened? I saw something more important. The words came out before he could stop them. But he didn't regret them when he saw the slight blush that colored her cheeks. They worked side by side for 3 hours. Emma told him about her work as a 3rd-grade teacher in an underfunded public school, about how she spent her evenings tutoring kids who couldn't afford extra help, and about her weekends here at Hope Harbor. She spoke about her students with such fierce love that Marcus felt ashamed of how he'd spent his recent years chasing partnerships and bonuses, measuring success in billable hours and square footage of his apartment. Why do you do all this? He asked as they carried boxes to a waiting family's car. Emma paused, her arms full. and looked at him with an expression so honest it made his heart skip, because I remember what it felt like to be hungry, to be invisible. When I was 9, my mom lost her job and we ended up at a food bank just like this one. The woman who helped us didn't just give us food. She gave us dignity. She looked my mom in the eye and said, "This is just a season. You're going to be okay." And we were, eventually. Emma's voice softened. "I'm just paying forward what someone gave to us when we had nothing." Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, a wall he'd built without realizing it, brick by brick, protecting himself from feeling too much in a world that rewarded emotional distance. Over the following weeks, Marcus returned to Hope Harbor every evening after work. He showed up in jeans and old t-shirts now, eager to leave his corporate armor at home. He and Emma fell into an easy rhythm, their conversations flowing from the profound to the playful. She told him about the student who finally learned to read after months of struggle. He told her about the pro bono case he'd taken, on for a tenant facing unfair eviction, the first time in years. He'd remembered why he'd gone to law school in the first place. Emma never asked about his money or his career. She never suggested expensive restaurants or weekend getaways. Instead, she invited him to her tiny studio apartment for homemade spaghetti, where they ate on a table that wobbled and laughed until their sides hurt over. Stories from their childhoods. She introduced him to her world, community gardens, free concerts in the park, sunrise walks along the river where the only cost was waking up early enough to see the city transform from gray to gold. One evening after the food bank closed, they sat on the front steps sharing a thermos of coffee Emma had brought. The autumn air was crisp, and the city lights flickered on like stars being born across the urban landscape. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma turned to him, her face open and patient. "I've spent years looking for something I couldn't name. I dated women who seemed perfect, who fit every criterion I thought mattered. But I felt nothing. Nothing real." He took a breath. "Then I saw you on that subway platform, and I realized I'd been searching for the wrong things. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just good, genuinely, uncomplicatedly good. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Emma's eyes glistened in the streetlight. "Marcus, I'm not special. I'm just—" "You're extraordinary," he interrupted gently. "Not because of what you wear or how you look, though I think you're beautiful. You're extraordinary because of your heart, because you see people, really see them, when the rest of the world walks by. You've reminded me what it means to be human." A tear rolled down Emma's cheek and she smiled through it. "You see me too. Really see me. Do you know how rare that is?" Marcus reached for her hand, rough from work and care, and held it like the precious thing it was. "I see you, Emma Rodriguez, and I don't ever want to stop seeing you." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the city hummed around them. A siren wailed in the distance. A bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Somewhere, a dog barked and children laughed. Marcus realized that this moment, sitting on concrete steps with a woman in a worn sweater, holding hands that had packed hundreds of food boxes, was worth more than every fancy dinner, every exclusive club, every carefully curated experience he'd collected in his search for meaning. Emma had no makeup and no fancy dress. She had something infinitely more valuable, the heart he'd been searching for all along. And in finding her, Marcus discovered something even more profound. He'd found the part of himself he'd lost somewhere along the way, buried beneath ambition and empty pursuits. In a world obsessed with surfaces, they had found depth. In a city of millions passing by without seeing, they had found someone who truly looked, and that made all the difference.